He's here.
Henry?
I guess he is. I guess he is.
Wow, you're colorful tonight. Look at this. Is this the recycled percussion time?
Yes, it's a recycled.
I didn't know they were selling neckwear, but this is Justin's picture on there somewhere.
On the back.
In court? No. Well, this morning I was in court. Well, this is what I call response. Yes.
There's a typo in there, it says C, when I really believe it's supposed to be speed.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The hour is 7 o'clock, and as mayor, I hereby call to order a meeting of the Laconia City Council scheduled for September 23rd, 2019 at this hour. As always, we'll begin our meeting tonight with a salute to our American flag. I would ask that you please rise and join Councilor Robert Hamill in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll note for the record that the minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by the city clerk, Cheryl Hebert. And at this time, I would ask that she please call a roll.
Counselor Cheney?
Here?
Counselor Bounds?
Here.
Counselor Littman?
Present.
Counselor Haynes?
Here.
Counselor Hamel?
Present.
Counselor Cheney? Hosmer?
Here. Two.
Mayor Engler?
Here. Let the record show that all 6 counselors are present for tonight's meeting and a quorum has been established. We'll also note for the record that the city council is joined at the front table tonight by the city manager, Scott Myers, and by the city finance director, Glenn Smith. Our first order of regular business, as always tonight, is acceptance of minutes. Counselors, before you, you have the minutes to our last meeting on September 9th. Those minutes were distributed to the council the next day, and as of now, no corrections or changes have been submitted to the clerk. So unless there are any at this moment, I'm going to declare the minutes to our meeting of September 9th to be accepted as submitted by the clerk. Consent and action items, we have one tonight, a temporary traffic order for Penny Patu Community Blood Drive to be held in the usual spot in the City Hall parking lot, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Saturday, October 5th. A motion would be in order to approve traffic or temporary traffic order number 15, Community Blood Drive, to be held on Saturday, October 5, 2019, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Councilor Hamill makes that motion. Councilor Haynes seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we are to citizen comments on matters not on the agenda. This is the appropriate place tonight for anyone who is in our audience who would like to come up to the microphone and address the city council on any matter that is not on tonight's agenda. Not on tonight's agenda. That fit anyone's description? No? I noticed Representative St. Clair is noticeably absent this evening, so
He'll be here probably.
we don't have the usual to count on there. Okay. Nominations, elections, and appointments. Call your attention to page 16 of your packet, and that is a recommendation to reappoint Wesley Anderson, our City Public Works Director, as the city's representative to the Winnipesaukee River Basin Program for a 3-year term expiring at the end of September 2022. Someone care to make that motion, please? Councilor Hosmer makes that motion, seconded by Councilor Hamel. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries, and the appointment is made. Public hearings, we have 2 tonight to conduct. This first one, let me page through my stuff here. Give me just a second. Here we go. Okay, the first one is a public hearing relative to the passage of ordinance number 2001-2201-13 relative to the updating the city's ordinances on obstructing sidewalks. Notice of this public hearing was made available in the September 11th, 2019 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, at the Community Center, the Public Library, and at the SAU office. So briefly, for our audience sake, both here in person tonight and watching on television, I will briefly explain that this first ordinance, proposed ordinance change is to change the penalty paragraph in the current city ordinance for obstructing a sidewalk. And the current ordinance says, as we talked about last time, that you could be punished for up to a $500 fine or imprisonment for not more than 90 days for blocking a sidewalk. And so the city attorney has recommended that a penalty of imprisonment for not 90 days is not an offense, or that is not an offense for which a violator can be imprisoned, and that we should specify the fine. So the ordinance removes the jail term language. The ordinance proposed change removes the jail language and specifies that the first offense for a violation is a $25 fine. The second offense for the same party for a violation is $75 fine, and third and subsequent offenses are $150 a fine per incident. So I'm going to open this public hearing at 7:06 p.m. and ask if there's anyone in attendance tonight who would like to offer testimony to the City Council about this proposed change. No? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing then at 7:07 p.m. and remind councilors that we will be discussing this matter later on in tonight's meeting. Next up is a public hearing on ordinance 2019-47 relative to updating the city ordinances relative to parking violation fines. Okay, let me find the right language here. So what is being proposed tonight in this ordinance change is that fines, which are now not universally, but largely $10 per violation, be changed. And so that the violation for overtime parking would go from $10 to $15, and all other parking violations except parking in a handicap space would rise from $10 to $25, including parking in front of a fire hydrant, no parking zone, blocking an alley or driveway, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really the gist of the changes for this ordinance, is to take most of the fines from $10 to $25 per incident. The fine for parking in a handicap space per RSA is $250. So I gotta read this. Notice of this public hearing was made available in the September 11, 2019 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was posted at the City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and at the SAU office. So I'm going to open this public hearing at 7:08 p.m. and ask if there's anyone in attendance tonight who would like to offer testimony to the City Council on the matter of raising fines for parking violations. No? All right, I'll close this public hearing at 7:09 p.m. And again, councilors will be taking this matter up tonight, again, under unfinished business. Okay, mayor's report. I wanted to spend a minute here tonight on the subject of the recycled percussion grand opening and concert that was held on Saturday along Union Avenue. And I will start by noting that from all reports, including firsthand ones, it was a successful event, and it was everyone was well behaved and had a good time, and the concert was well attended. And so we congratulate the recycled percussion people for pulling off this event and drawing favorable attention to our city, and wish them well on the opening of their new store at Lakeport Square. And I also want to give a huge thank you to a whole lot of public employees that I can't name individually. It would take too long. I don't have the list in front of me, but certainly all the department heads, from the police chief to the fire chief to the public works chief to the parks and rec chief, et cetera, et cetera. This event was pulled together in a really brief amount of time. And the department heads in particular spent an awful lot of time over the last month under changing circumstances that were changing literally right up until almost the last minute, to pull this off from a city standpoint in every aspect. And they were cooperative, they were flexible, they were in every way helpful to pull this off. And the city manager and I had a conversation about this. You know, this is one of those things when you add up the expenses to an event, you never add up the soft costs, if you will, that all the administrative time and whatnot that went into several meetings. I don't even know how many it got up to in the end of all the department heads coming together to pull this off. Must have been a half dozen or so of them. So a big shout out to all of them. And what made this particularly difficult to be able to pull this off in such a short amount of time was that we had no idea really how many people to expect. And we didn't know whether it was going to be 200 or 2,000 or 20,000. And to prepare the streets and public safety issues and whatnot for a crowd of indeterminate size right up until the last minute as to how many people were actually going to be there is quite a task to be able to pull that off. And so thank you to all the city employees who were involved, and especially thank you to all the department heads for putting on a great face and showing real administrative expertise in being able to ensure such a safe and prosperous event. And the final shout out I'd like to give on this front is to Michelle DuPont and the other people at the O-Pee-Chee Inn and Spa. Their decision to allow, as most of you know, this event was originally planned to be held in the street. And if the same amount of people had shown up in the street, I think it would not have been pretty. A lot of private property would have, not intentionally or maliciously, but a lot of private property would probably have been trampled on, and the decision by Michelle to open up her parking lot there at Lakeport Square to literally at the last minute to relocate this event to that parking lot where it was safe and secure and everybody had a good time, and I think that was absolutely key to pulling off the successful event. So on behalf of all of us at the city, I want to give a thank you to Michelle and her staff for everything they did to make this possible and to be good neighbors and to welcome recycled percussion to Lakeport Square. Committee reports. I'm looking in Councilor Bound's direction. We have short-term rental situation, which we're going to discuss later on tonight,
That's
right?
on the agenda. Do you want me to briefly discuss it now?
No, unless you need to.
I
If
think
you're about 3 feet away from your microphone. So.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
You need to get him a lapel one.
No, I think it's just more appropriate to deal with it when it comes up on the agenda, rather than revisiting it again.
Okay, and the proposed historic overlay district,
Okay, so we had our final subcommittee meeting. We made some final changes to the proposal. That will go before the planning board. The current plan is for the first meeting in October. The planning board will take that up at that point in time, probably schedule a public hearing, and we'll see what comes out of that. So the final draft, so to speak, that was recommended by the committee has been sent to the planning board, and they will consider it at the first meeting in October.
so it sounds like it, under best of circumstances, it won't come back to this table until November or December?
That's probably a good guess. It could come back in October, depending upon what no.
No, it can't
They
if you're gonna
can't,
hold a
no,
public
because
hearing, huh?
there'll be a public hearing in November. So November is the earliest, and December is probably the likely date that it'll get back to the council.
All right, scenic road motorcycle noise petition, we're gonna take that up tonight under city manager's report. Is that what the plan is?
Sure.
Okay. Any other committee business tonight? All right, how about liaison reports? Did the Heritage Commission meet?
Yes.
And what, can you give us a report on that?
Basically, they had 2 demolition permits, and they went through that. They've been talking about the Heritage Commission Award, but they're not at the point yet where they want to bring that to the council.
So there was nothing further on the church situation?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing. No appearance. Is there an expiration date on the demolition permit?
I don't think there is on the demo permit. There is, obviously, once the application gets accepted and reviewed at the Heritage Commission level, that starts the clock ticking on some different, review and follow-up activities. But again, because it's the request of the diocese through legal counsel that kind of first reading not be held, that clock hasn't even started ticking yet.
Okay. Did you have a question, Counselor?
No, I had as a liaison report, I wanted
Okay. Are you?
to mention, I'd like to take this opportunity to compliment the Laconia Police Department's Honor Guard, who presented the colors before yesterday's New England Patriots game in Foxborough. They did a wonderful job and represented their department and the city extremely well. For those who would like to see the actual color guard presentation, I would suggest you go to the department's Facebook page, where a video of their performance is included. And on my personal behalf, and I suspect on the council's behalf, I want to compliment the department generally and the Honor Guard particularly.
They probably would have outscored the Jets if they'd employed them. All right, any other liaison reports? Okay, citizens' request to comment on current agenda items. This is the appropriate place tonight for anyone in our audience who wishes to address the council on any matter that is on tonight's agenda. See a hand in the back. Yes, sir, if you could come to the microphone. Oh, is that former Mayor Tardif there? Yes, it is. My eyes weren't that good, sorry. So for the record, if you would identify yourself and where you live, please.
My name is Tom Tardif. I'm in Ward 5. I live on Winter Street, and I'm concerned about the second reading of parking on the sidewalk, meaning blocking the sidewalk. I think this legislation or ordinance is not necessary. I believe that all sidewalks have to be handicapped accessible. If they're blocked in any way, a handicapped person could not maneuver through. So I think you could amend the ordinance dealing with handicap parking and include a sidewalk. And the reason I say that is, I don't think, and I didn't attend committee meetings or anything else, but most of the streets in the city of Laconia are 30 feet wide. Some are 40. And like Highland Street, they're a combination there. Winter Street is the 30-foot wide, and Lafayette Street's a 40-foot wide. And if you notice, most of the 40-foot streets have curbing, granite curbing, some grass area, and a sidewalk. So therefore, if you adopt the ordinances tonight, that seems to me the Public Works Director would have to go out and put all of the white lines delineating from the yellow line how much space there is. Some of the streets have that white line, some don't, some have some, and others have none. Winter Street has none. Winter Street has a lot of people parking on the sidewalk. And considering the number of school buses and other traffic servicing Woodland Heights School, they have no choice but to park on the sidewalk, because if they park in the street on either side, then the school buses and a car can't pass. There's not enough room. I think Elm Street, the same situation, where it's not a 40-foot wide, it's a 30-foot wide, and they have difficulties there with cars parking even today. Nothing's changed since last year's school year. So I'd like you to rethink it, because I think the Public Works has got to identify the police departments to protect and serve, not chase down people parking on the sidewalk. So they're going to have a list of 40-foot wide streets not to visit, because if they park on the street, they won't be parking on the sidewalk. They don't have to. I acknowledge that it's a nuisance, a big nuisance, to have people parking half on the sidewalk, half in the street, sometimes all on the sidewalk, and other times in the street. And there isn't enough room to pass with the buses and oncoming traffic, especially if they park on both sides of the street, just shy of one another. So I'm asking you to rethink your vote and seek some information about streets and how wide they are and how many there are. Because if there's only a few, the people that are parking in the street, maybe the city manager could consult the landlords of these multi-tenant units and try to convince them to provide parking in the back lot and not pursue parking in the street. Thank you very much.
Just for information purposes, I'd like to comment that what's being proposed at this point in time is not to institute a new ordinance that says you can't park on a sidewalk. We already have that.
Yep.
This is simply to say you can't go to jail for doing it, is the primary purpose of it.
You can go to jail?
You can't. Right now, theoretically, you could go to jail for parking on the sidewalk, and the proposed change that we're voting on tonight is to remove that provision and specify what the fines are for doing so. But it's not, it's already illegal to park on the sidewalks.
I understand that. I tried to
I
follow
just
it.
didn't want the impression to be left that we're
Okay.
talking about imposing a new ordinance that would prohibit it.
I tried following it on the city's website, and I could not come up with that conclusion.
Okay.
And
It's already illegal by city ordinance.
But there's going to be a fine
There already is a fine.
for parking. Well, then I guess I don't know what I read. I have one thing. I came in late, and this is just a generosity. It doesn't take any action. I thought I'd remind the city council of Rule 27, and I made up a copy of Rule 27, and I'd just like to circulate that rule to all of you.
What is
Is
it?
that like catch-22?
It's not, I think it's a serious catch-22. It says if the council passes a resolution regarding the budget or any resolution concerning money, that it can't be voted upon on the same night, the
Okay.
same meeting.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yep. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Wow, laminated copies even. Huh. Okay, anyone else would like to address the council on a matter that is on tonight's agenda? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Jeanette Van de Water, 1A Gables Drive. My husband and I are fairly new owners in Southdown Association, and we'd like you to consider the rental situation in light of people like us who bought the place thinking that we would have a help with the expenses, being able to sometimes rent it.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing, a very
Oh.
hard time. Try again, please.
Try
I'm
again.
sorry.
Okay? Is that better?
Yes.
Jeanette Van de Water, my husband and I are here. We're fairly new owners in Laconia, very happily so. We enjoy very much it. We've bought our house late last fall, and we hope to help with some of the expenses as a rental, a short-term rental in Southdown Shores. And it was, the bylaws at that time said if we rented, we could rent for 7 days minimum. And so it would just be in the summer, and it would help us with the expenses. So we'd ask you to please consider that.
So you would like to be able to rent your home in Southdown for a minimum of 7 days? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we this summer, we used an agency, a management agency, and we had a lot of post-it for the prospective tenants' rules and regulations that they were to abide by.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, my name is Sarah Rosenblum. I live at 1359 Old North Main Street. And I last came before the council when you were considering short-term rentals last summer because my neighbor had rented out their house and it was a problem. So I've been following this kind of from a distance. I am not sure that I have looked at the latest copy of the regulations that are proposed, and I don't have any particular problem with the regulations that I see, but I think it would be a good idea if they went a little further. And I don't see them as preventing the situation that arose last summer. And the reason for that is that the situation we had in my neighborhood was non-resident property owner who had no intention of being in the property, supervising the rentals, no investment in the neighborhood, and it basically hired everything out. And it seems to me that if you have in the zoned area that we are, the most restrictive single-family rental, or single-family residential, people do not have the expectation that there will be short-term rentals next door. That is, if you buy a place on Paugus Bay and in the shorefront residential area, you do have that expectation. You see condos next to you, you see in Southdown, you know that people come and go. And so I think what I would like to, that I think could maybe solve this problem a little bit, and that I've seen done other places, is having a requirement that the person who is doing the rental, it's their primary residence, that they are not only the property owner, but it is their primary residence. So they have some incentive to maintain standards, to supervise the rental, to vet the people who come and rent, and just make have an investment in the community and an investment in the neighborhood. And it would prevent neighborhoods from changing radically without, just around people, without them buying into it or even realizing that there's been a change in the law. So that's what I would like to see or think would improve the rules as proposed. And I did, just doing a little bit of research, I came across a site that does, that summarized laws for industrial, business rentals in various big cities. And that is a very common requirement that they're trying to avoid having people basically set up hotels and, here's my apartment here, here's my apartment here, here's my apartment here, and have Airbnbs and the similar things be more like what they were envisioned at the start, where people have homes that they're not in all the time and use them to generate a little bit of extra income, but not that they're starting a business and sliding in underneath the rules for hotels. So that's my perspective.
Okay, thank you. Let me note for everyone's information, so I suspect more than a couple of you tonight are probably here on this subject, or to listen to this subject or speak to this subject, exactly where we are procedurally on this. The City Council approved a suggested ordinance change in this, regulating this area. First of all, I need to say that right now, it is not legal to be operating a short-term rental business in the city of Laconia except at the Weirs. So that ordinance has been on the books for decades. And so what we're looking at that ordinance and perhaps fine-tuning it or changing it or whatever. We'll get to that later on tonight. But as of right now, if you or anyone else is doing it other than at the Weirs, it's not legal. So that's point number one. So where we are tonight is by statute, we have to refer the proposed ordinance change. Only the City Council can change a city ordinance. We have to refer that ordinance to the planning board for their advice. So we did that. And now we have back from the planning board tonight before us what they suggested, their opinion of what we suggested, and perhaps some suggested changes. Well, there are some suggested changes to what. So now it's back before the City Council. And the one thing I could tell all of you is that, and I probably shouldn't be so presumptive, but I think that there's very little, if any chance at all, that the City Council will pass this tonight in any shape or form. That it is very likely that we will hold a public hearing on this matter, whether that public hearing is at our next meeting or the meeting after that. So this is not the final word. We haven't really discussed it amongst ourselves yet, and we will do that later tonight. Anyone on the council disagree with that assessment? I think we're almost certainly headed for a public hearing on this, not tonight, but at a future meeting on this subject. Okay? All right. Is there anyone else here tonight who would like to speak to that subject or any other subject that is on tonight's agenda? Yes, sir.
Good to see you guys again. First of all,
give the clerk your name, please, for the
Mark
record.
Burrell, I live at 68 Warren Street, and to address her, Airbnb wasn't started to undermine the hotels, okay? Airbnb was started by two guys in California, okay, who went to an event and couldn't find a place to stay. So those two chose to start Airbnb, okay? Airbnb wasn't designed to undermine the hotels, but to offer a place to stay for people that wanted a personable service, not a hotel where somebody knocks on your door, here, let me change your towels. You all know how I do it when you come to my house. You have a private room, you have a bathroom, shower, kitchen, washer and dryer, the whole 9 yards. Her comment to the fact that if the owner's not there, they don't have a vested value in the neighborhood, I disagree with that because, yes, it's a way to make money, and there was a report on how much money was made this year. if I'm not living in the house, I still have a vested interest in it, in the neighborhood, because that house is making me money. Is it a business? Probably so. By definition, it probably is. But for her to stand there and say that, and anybody else to say that, I just disagree with it, because I do it to meet people around the world. And as you know, I've had people from around the world stay at my house. I just had people from the Netherlands. I've had people from everywhere. I have people from Israel coming next month, okay? Even though my situation is different because I live on the property and I'm considered a rooming place and not a short-term rental now, I just want the council to be aware and to think about how they're going to go about doing this. I understand that the number of days and number of times has been eliminated, which is a good thing, because as somebody once said, I did 18 times in 3 weeks. You know, I had somebody in my house every other night. That 18 times or 184 days, whichever comes first, that's telling somebody they got to pick and choose, first of the season, middle, or end. Okay? So that's basically all I have to say.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Paula Heiser, and I'm a very enthusiastic super host for Airbnb. I'm actually on my 4th season, and I've been operating very quietly. I don't think I've created much of a ripple in my community at all, and I've actually had support from my neighbors. I'd like to just very briefly state...
Do you live in this property?
I did live in the property full-time. It is considered my primary residence, but I'm not on the property when I'm renting it. So when I'm not on the property, I'm in Meredith, 10 minutes away. And I have my neighbor who is also an Airbnb host who watches the property for me if I'm not there. Actually, all my neighbors do. It's kind of a neighborhood thing that if something seems wrong, somebody will give me a call. And in the 4 years that I've been doing it, I haven't really had any issues at all. Airbnb is a very good platform because it's public. You rank them, they rank you. It encourages good behavior, and I completely understand the angst of this woman back here because she unfortunately had a really bad neighbor. And you can't always control what kind of neighbor you're going to get when somebody moves in next door to you. Whether it's an Airbnb or a long-term rental or just, you know, a neighbor. I'd just like to point out a couple of things that I think are really important for Laconia as far as Airbnb goes, or any short-term rental. I have had 344 reservations in the time that I've been open, which, you know, I have maybe 2 to 5 people in my house at any given time. And that's my limit. I set very clear goals and limits as to how many cars can be there, the noise, how many people can be there. I'm very clear about that. But those people, when they come to this town, and they're coming from all over the world, like this other gentleman said, I've had people from all over the world come here. And they're coming here because they're finding us on Airbnb. They're not going to find Laconia, New Hampshire, someplace else. But they're coming here because it's a small community and a cute house and a cute little downtown, and they're going to Wayfarer and Local and Patrick's and all the other places where we send them out to, and they're supporting those businesses, which, you know, we all need support. So Airbnb has a really positive side to it. It's a great community. I'm really proud to be part of that Airbnb community. I use Airbnb when I travel. It's a great opportunity for a lot of people to have a second property and maybe make some extra income as well. So that's all I'd like to say about that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to address the council tonight? Mr. Morissette.
For the record, I'm Kevin Morissette. Good evening. 518 Shore Drive, Laconia. I just noticed this in the paper the other day. I haven't really been following it, but we have a place at the end of Eastman Shore Road, 226 Eastman Shore Road. We've had it since 1989, so it's been 30 years. We rented it out since the day we bought it. You know, we rented out for basically Motorcycle Week and then maybe 8 other weeks besides that, and then it's not used at all. So my question is, I was looking through this, you know, what is the consideration for the proposed short-term lodging.
I'm sorry, say again?
So when it says short-term lodging, how many days or weeks is it that the short-term
There's
lodging
a
comes
definition
into
under the
effect?
proposed ordinance.
I didn't see that.
I'll find it here for you.
So when it comes to butter notification, what are you going to give them a chance to, you just basically notifying them, or you going to give them a chance to speak against it, or
Yeah.
if there's any issues or anything?
All right, so the definition under the proposal, a dwelling unit where transient lodging is provided for compensation for stays of between 1 and 184 consecutive nights, and where the dwelling unit would normally be considered a residential unit, living unit not associated with regular commercial activities such as a hotel, motel, or bed and breakfast.
Okay.
In other words, your house would qualify as short-term lodging because it's in a
Oh,
residential area, it's a house, I assume,
It is.
and
It's a cabin.
it's not a bed and breakfast.
It's not a bed and breakfast. It's a nice little cabin on the lake that people love to rent out. You know, you come to the Lakes region, there used to be all kinds of rentals on the lake, cabins and stuff at the weirs, and those things have just disappeared. We've had the same tenants for 20 years, come every, you know, that's their
So that's,
vacation for
that's
2
the
weeks.
definition that's being
Yeah.
proposed by the planning board.
Yeah.
For what, and what I said earlier is that right now, you can't do that.
We've been doing it for 30 years. So the other thing I have a question on, it says, to determine maximum occupancy of a dwelling, floor space, square footage. You know, I don't know, you know, how is that gonna come into play on the square foot? This thing has 5 bedrooms. I mean, it's a small cape, it has
Well,
3 upstairs,
hopefully
one on the
later
first.
on tonight, Kevin, when we get to this on the agenda, the planning director will explain the administrative guidelines that would be used to make such a decision.
Okay. Those were a few of my concerns, and just, you know, how it comes into play since it's been for 30 years this way, you know? It's not like it just popped up, you know, 2 years ago. It's not like something we said, oh, we're gonna buy and rent out. I mean, we've had it for 30 years.
Yes, I think the honest answer from this council is, as the lady said earlier, when this situation on Old North Main Street was brought to our attention, I think it's fair to say that no one on this council had any concept for how many housing units were being rented out on a short-term basis in the city.
Okay? Very good, thank you.
I mean, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, nobody was doing Airbnbs. I mean, that just wasn't on the, and it's changing the face of how people travel and get lodging. It's just making huge changes.
I mean, we don't advertise this thing. I mean,
I
we
know.
get the same repeat people coming every year. We have, I mean, maybe we get, we're not advertising it on
Yeah.
thing. I mean, we're there, I mean, we're not there personally, but I mean, we're there twice a week. We mow the grass ourselves. We pick up the trash on Wednesday and Saturdays. We don't even send the trash up to the
So
road.
I think what's being said here, and the other gentleman alluded to this a minute ago, whether you agree with it or not, and not saying the council agrees with it at this point in time in any way, shape, or form. We're, as I said, we're just in the formative stages of this. But basically what this is saying is, if I may be so bold as to interpret it, is at some point, you're running a business in a residential area. In other words, at some point, there's a difference between renting out a house for a year's lease or whatever to a party who's gonna live there with their family or whatever the situation is. There's a difference between that and running a business.
I'm waiting to hear the difference.
And so then we have to make those qualitative decisions here at the council as to whether that's good or bad, and if so, if we want to regulate it and to what extent.
Very good. I'll be waiting for some answers. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, my name is Dick Castrucci. I live off of Old North Main Street. And I I saw what happened with the last Airbnb issue that you had a year ago. I looked at your proposal on July 18th, and I then looked at the proposal on August 14th, and the only difference I see is that you took away one paragraph from the original.
Well, if I might interrupt you, the planning board did that, not the city council.
Okay. Now, again, the question came up, and I have some interest. I'd like to know how you're going to determine parking spaces that are allowed. I would also like to know if the owners of the property live out of town. Will there be a requirement to have an individual on site that can respond within 30 minutes to handle emergencies that can speak for the owner?
All right, that's a good regulatory question, and we will ask that of the city planning director when he comes up.
Other issues that I'm thinking about because of the Lakes region, is there going to be anything said about septic capacity? If there are septic systems that are in these houses, do they support large numbers of people? And that's another issue. I just thought I'd throw that out. But thank you so much, and I'm anxious to hear what the
I assume the planning director is making notes over there on what subjects he would like to see covered. Anyone else, please? Okay. We're going to move on then, and next up on tonight's agenda is the city manager's report. Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Included in your agenda packet for this month, you have two reports. You have the project update. We continue to be active in Court Street and Union Ave down in the Lakeport area, and will be for probably the lion's share of the remainder of this construction season. Messer Street and a couple of others, Messer Street got its final course of asphalt today. The structures got raised late last week, and that is paved, as were a couple of smaller side streets that got their final wearing course as well. The gas line installation that was being done by Liberty Utility that was going on Court Street in between the Jersey barriers was completed last week. The directional boring happened on Thursday, and the Jersey barriers were removed on Friday. I know there was some concern from some residents who thought we were back in there tearing up the street that was just paved last fall or earlier this year in the spring. And that's not the case. It was simply the barriers were there simply because that pipe needed to be welded on site, and the length was approximately 500 feet. And it was a directional boring going on underneath the bridge and on Court Street, and that was the only realistic place where that was going to occur. So we did not go in and tear up that street that we had just done, and that work is complete on that section to it. As I mentioned, Messer Street was paved today. We are looking on a couple of intersections for the ADA compliant intersections for the pedestrian crossings and those types of things. A standalone one will be attacked in October. That'll be here at Main Street and the Church Street intersection, and then a couple of other ones will also be done in conjunction with the road project. So the ones here at Main Street will be done, and then also in Lakeport Square when we finish that portion of the project this year. So those are going on. We did the pruning of the Pearly Oak.
Would you take a question now, or do you want us to come back?
I want to come to roads. I appreciate that you acknowledge that residents have been concerned about kind of what's going on with the roads. And I do think that if you're following closely what's going on with the monthly updates, that you do a very good job in terms of laying this out. But I think people are looking for or to understand sort of the bigger picture as opposed to all the sort of the detail that we cover here. Like, what's the end point? What is our goal for finishing Court Street? You know, I think that, for example, even what you just outlined to the community, I think there's some misunderstanding that what's laid down there now is actually even the final base coat. And so I guess it's sort of like putting in our report and publicizing in the paper, because I've been getting more hits on this than pretty much anything else for a long time. And just in terms of trying to somehow package this in a way that the public can understand that the project's going to go for X period of time, expect
an endpoint to be this. I think the other issue that people don't understand is all the infrastructure. It's not just a paving job, it's about replacing utilities and the like. And I think some of the things that are extended is because you can only do certain things at certain points in time. But I think we need the help of explaining it differently, and the paper could, I think, do a better job in helping us convey to the community what's going on and what sort of the end point is. I know it's frustrating to go over some of the roads and the like, and sort of seeing it dug up and then put back and so on and so forth. But I really would like to see us do something different, because I really do think that we're losing the community with respect to the value that we're investing into trying to change the streets here.
All right, we can work on a format that maybe kind of roadmaps it. Sometimes the challenge is, we say, on a perfect schedule, we're going to be done here, and then you get a weather delay, or you run into ledge, or one of our utilities, whether it's gas or telephone or somebody else, doesn't hit their schedule for whatever reason. But as long as we frame it as this is the target and within parameters, we can try to fine-tune who's in doing what and what the end game is, as you described it.
Sort of like the milestones that we're looking for accomplishing, as opposed to all the
Sure.
the
I mean,
nitty-gritty.
we know that internally, sometimes
Yes.
trying to put out too much information is just, overkill. So these reports are available for the public on our website. They're linked to the Laconia Links newsletter that comes out every Friday, and if anybody doesn't get our e-newsletter, they can email my assistant, Nancy Brown. You can find her address on the website, and all these reports and the agendas are all available. But we can work out a different format that maybe breaks it down into some smaller chunks so that people know that, here it's the Liberty Gas Company, then we're doing storm drains, then we're doing sewer, or whatever the order might
Or
be,
it could be
and
just-
how it works.
It could just be in blocks like utilities, or
Yep.
then course paving, then final paving.
Sure.
I don't know that they need all the,
I think the simpler question, simpler approach is, what's it going to look like when it's done? And is it going to be done this construction season?
Course Street is done this construction season. One of the things we're doing now, and the reason these projects are taking
Well,
longer.
not all of Court Street is.
Well, this project, and then, the bridge is being replaced at some point next year. But for this phase is done, and other than the bridge, we're going to be out of Court Street for a while. The negative is we are doing a lot of work with all the utilities, including our sewer, our water, and our storm drain, so that when we're building some of these major roads, they've got the right crown to them, so the water sheds off. It's got places to go so that the water's not pooling and damaging the roads. Once these comprehensive fixes are done, all of these major arteries should only just be looking for routine maintenance overlays in coming years, which are relatively short. You hit it, you get it done, you're out of there. The reason they're doing it now is we're completely, in some cases, as I've mentioned before, we've got unsuitable base that we're identifying now. When we're making the investment, we're pulling materials out and making sure we've got an appropriate base. And on Court Street, for instance, rather than doing, I think, what is a traditional 4 inches of asphalt, we're putting 5.5 inches of asphalt down on Court Street to meet today's traffic demands and truckloads, so that we are getting a great bang for our buck. And going forward, that road's going to hold up for a long time. But we'll work on a format and try to emphasize those and give some more milestones with the projects.
some of the utilities are 100 years old underneath the road there.
Some are. Sewer, where it isn't pressurized, some of our sewer infrastructure is still functioning fine, and it might be clay pipes going back more than 100 years. Water obviously is pressurized, and there's more wear and tear, and, when salt gets in, and what salt does to pipes can be challenging too. But we'll get a format to try to not overload, but get some more specific dates of how we anticipate the project playing out and what the end game is for it.
Thank you.
Scott, to go along with Henry, I think it's just not the construction that's frustrating. I think what's also frustrating is how the trenches are left. I brought this up several times, and I'm going to pick on Court Street and Union Avenue again. They haven't been there for a few weeks now, and the trenches are atrocious. Up beyond the new living for the high-rise there's a trench that's paved. At one end, it drops about 3 inches, and the other end is level. Same way on Union Avenue. You're driving down on the right-hand turn lane, and you slam down, and then it's level. You go to the intersection to turn right. If you don't have a truck, you're gonna bottom out, and it's that way tonight. So somebody's gotta be responsible for going back and assuring that if they're not in the area, we have rain or whatever, that the ruts that are made because of the rain are taken care of. And I don't see that happening. You know, like I said, Court and Main, that nobody's been there for a while, and everything in that area is terrible. The middle of the intersection is terrible. People are going all the way around because there's a square area there that it's just not good. And I think we can do a better job, or the construction companies, if they're the ones responsible, we should hold their feet to the fire and make sure that's being done. You know, Lakeport Square is the same thing. I mean, they've been there, they haven't been there for a while now, and it's dirt, dust is flying everywhere. I think that aspect is not being looked at properly, and I think we can, as a city, we can do a whole lot better on that end. So, thank you.
Okay, duly noted.
Go ahead.
Okay, so on the Pearly Pond project, the arborist was there and did the pruning. Because of the proximity to the pond, it was suggested that we don't do a spraying for ands, but we were going to do an injection to the base as a part of helping just to try to preserve that tree. So that'll be a second piece. We have bids due, and I think they might have been due in the last week or so on the engineering services, so we'll be looking to get that working so that Risfrost Shumway on the city's behalf can get back to DES and talk about what we might need for any kind of wetland permits and what the ultimate approach will be. So once we have that information, we'll certainly connect with the council, planning staff, Conservation Commission, interested family members as well on that. Moving on to the Economic Development Report that's in your packet. Again, we continue to be at full employment, as economists say. So for the state and down to the county and the local level, we're in the low to mid 2% for the unemployment. Inflation number came out for August at 1.7, so we're still for the year right in that 1.7% range, and we're 8 months through the year as far as inflation data. It'll be interesting to see what the September number does. We had that Saudi oil issue that spiked oil for just a couple of days. Also seeing what some of the tariffs are doing as far as some costs. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a little blip up in September because a couple of those events or not. I do have one reappointment to the Laconia Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. Ken Malone is coming up on completing a 5-year term at this point. He has a CPA background in a firm and recently retired, but brings a great skill set to the Housing Authority Board, and I am happy to reappoint Ken to an additional 5-year term to the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners, and appreciate his service and willing to continue to serve. Last meeting, it was a question about a couple of catch basins and sidewalk cracking. I did walk the entire length, both sides, with the Public Works Director last week. We do have 3 catch basins that are under warranty that will be addressed this fall before we wind down the construction season. There are a couple of cracks. We have a lot of infrastructure in the sidewalks with all the utilities and everything being underground, and that's driving a few of them. We're monitoring them. There's nothing there that is causing any heaving or major, hazards as far as a trip or anything. So we'll be monitoring those as the seasons go along and do that. The final thing I wanted to touch base with you on tonight is this aerial overview of Scenic Drive coming out of the Weirs, and this ties into the petition and the committee meeting on motorcycle noise in particular coming out of the Weirs and what could be done to address it. So again, Public Works Director and I went out there and went up and down the road and discussed options. And then after I go over those, I've got a little feedback from the police chief as well. But if I can turn you to the upper left corner of the aerial view you have, and you can see those 2 green dots that are there. That's that sharp turn curve where Watson Road turns into Scenic or vice versa. So there are the dangerous curve signs. Our approach there would be to put 2 solar-powered flashing beacons on there to additionally catch someone's attention going to it. Coming a little bit back towards the Weirs Beach area, you can see kind of an orange color dot in the road. That's an area that we would be painting 30 miles per hour on the road as a warning coming up. So it's not on a sign, but it'd be painted on the street in an appropriate distance away from the curve so that vehicles would have an opportunity to see it and realize that something is coming up or how fast they're going.
Only going uphill, not downhill?
That is going the uphill, yes. We could potentially identify another one on the downhill, but that's the one that we thought would make sense. There, we think the lion's share of vehicle traffic is coming out of the weirs and heading up that way, but we could certainly look at another one. That particular spot is in front of a state-owned sewage pump station, so it would not be in front of anybody's residence looking out at something painted on the road. Way down to the bottom of the picture would be an area that we could install a solar-powered, radar flashing type of sign that we talked about. That seems to be coming right at the, if you're coming out of the weirs, there's a hill going up. Again, the idea behind that was it's before some of the townhouses in the area that was complaining, but also somebody may be looking to get on the accelerator a little bit as they're wanting to go uphill. So we thought that would be an appropriate place to have a permanently mounted sign.
And that's right before you get to the townhouses and the condos.
Yes. Additionally, from Chief Canfield, they have stepped up some extra patrols in there. They are going to be installing the Stat Pack this week, which will track the number of vehicles and the speed of vehicles, the speed that the vehicles are traveling. That'll be out there once they install it for a 7-day period. They'll go through and assess the data and get a better handle on what the speeds that they're seeing and that type of stuff. And then additionally, after that, they'll get the radar trailer up there as one other means for doing that after the Stat Pack is there. So the changes that I spoke of, realistically, we're probably looking at spring installations, especially for just the timing of ordering them and then the painting of the street. It would probably make sense to paint it now and then going through a winter season. So everything there would be ordered and ready to go for as soon as spring conditions allowed. In doing that, we're probably looking at about $2,000 a piece for the solar-powered flashing beacons, and probably around $3,000 for the radar thing. So around $7,000, a little bit more in that ballpark for the items that I've mentioned.
Scott?
Questions? Councilor Hamel.
The painting of the emblem, 30 miles an hour, is that going to be done on Watson Road also, or just?
That's what the mayor had asked, so we can go look and identify. For right now, we were talking about doing it there just because we're thinking the majority of traffic exiting is, but we can look at another one on it as well.
Yeah, I
I
think
mean,
you should.
and additionally, there are chevrons is the word I'm looking for, right? Those little black and yellow arrows and stuff. I mean, there's a few of those at each curve, along with the curve sign itself, and then the flashing beacon. So there are a few additional measures that are already in place there. But we got the stencils and the paint. We could certainly look for a place on Watson as well and do it.
Well,
on the
I
other end.
personally would recommend that as a
not a
motorcycle
problem.
rider. That
Sure.
That's a very dangerous curve going downhill.
Yep, so that's the update, and happy to take any additional input, but those would be the approaches that we would have at this time.
Councilor Lippman.
Want to go back to one other one, but if anybody else has a question on this one.
Well, I just want to thank Scott and Public Works for looking into this, because I think it's important.
So do you need any action on the council's part on this?
No, if there's just general, that's a good initial approach, and we can do it in the price point that I'm talking with existing funds. We'll find it somewhere, and like I say, we'll
Okay,
look to
are
have
we-
them in
Are
place
we
for the
ready to move
springtime.
on to general questions for the manager then, or comments?
I would just like to comment that this report is very responsive, and thank you for all the efforts from police,
and Wes,
Wes,
and the chief, yeah.
Public Works, and the chief. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay, anything else for the city manager? Councilor Lippman.
The Weirs Beach Restoration Project, we have no update from the previous, no update current, but is there DES, is there anything happening there?
We're still in conversations about what they're looking for in terms of water garden installation and that type of stuff, and our approach of, we've made some significant investments there, and we've recently purchased some additional conservation property, and how can we find a happy medium there? So we're having good, productive conversations.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions or comments for the manager? Councilor Cheney.
Thank you. Getting back to Pearly Pond, I want to thank you for what we've accomplished so far. I had intended to bring with me tonight, and thrashing around realized I didn't, an article from the Union Leader which shows the city of Manchester mowing up to the edges of their ponds. And if they're not afraid to put it on the pages of the Union Leader, I don't think we should be frightened about mowing around the pond. I doubt DES will even know we're there. I'm just hoping we can.
Now they will.
We can get you a bright neon green safety vest and a mower.
I'm at the point where I'd almost do it. Anyways, I would just hope we could get to.
I think in addition, it's some of the alders that are growing into the pond that we're hoping to fully remove because they're invasive, and if we don't get them out completely and properly, they're just going to grow back on it. So I think it's one of those things, if we had maintained down there for years and we were doing it, it would be a non-issue that we continued to maintain it. But I think part of it is we want to go into the pond, we want to get the alders out, and then we want to do a small dredge and kind of restore back to where the active and healthy edge of the pond was as well. So we're looking at some small dredge in addition.
And cutting some of that?
Cutting, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on then to new business. First item of new business, counselors, is on page 25 of your packet, and that is a temporary traffic order request number 16 for the 2019 Pumpkin Festival. Who's going to explain the change? This is not a consent and action item tonight because there are changes.
It's just some slight changes. I think the footprint to it, as you can see with the map that we were hoping to get in the packets for Friday, but they weren't available to us at that point. The footprint is basically the same. I think it's just realistically as to when Beacon West might be open, where the car show was held or something, and maybe the hours slightly. I didn't truly pull the last year's order to this year's order. They're 90+% identical and similar footprint and similar closings starting on Friday night. But there were some slight changes, and that's why it didn't go on consent.
Okay, any questions before we get to motion? All right, a motion be in order to approve temporary traffic order number 16 for the 2019 Pumpkin Festival as presented, pending approval by the Special Events Review Committee. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Counselor Bounds seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries unanimously. Next up, we are on to a proposal to amend City Zoning Ordinance 235-41, adding a new section M, short-term lodging, and adding a new definition for the same at paragraph 235-13. And I'm going to start the conversation tonight by turning this introduction over to Counselor Bounds, who heads the ordinance committee that recommended City Council action on this and forwarded it to the Planning Board with the approval of the rest of Council. Counselor Bounds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to try to be brief. But just to give everybody a history, some of you have made reference to it tonight, but there was an incident about a year ago that sort of triggered this kind of inquiry. As a result of that trigger, we realized that except for commercial resorts and shorefront residential, and that is essentially the Weirs, that Airbnbs and that type of platform were illegal in the city of Laconia. That triggered council to initiate a process to explore how we could accommodate without materially impacting other residents, but how we could accommodate that kind of platform in the city of Laconia. By statute and by ordinance, we then referred that to the planning board for recommendations, because that's where the recommendations would come from. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. That's where the recommendations would come from. It went to the planning board, it went to committee meetings. We had a public hearing, which some of you attended at the planning board, expressing your concerns, your support, pro and con for using this type of platform. What came out of the planning board was a recommendation that would try to accommodate all of the concerns, and that's a tough nut to crack, to accommodate all those concerns. What's before the council now is simply the recommendation of the planning board. And I anticipate that this is not going to public hearing tonight, that there's going to be further discussion about short-term lodging. How are we going to accommodate folks like Ms. Heiser, who does her Airbnb with respect to this matter, and allow her to do that? How are we going to accommodate other folks who have spoken in order to just basically earn a living and supplement your living, and not run into situations where folks are buying property in residential neighborhoods in the city of Laconia for the sole purpose of turning them into short-term hotels. I mean, that has been the issue that we're struggling with. There's proposals from exempting three-month rentals entirely, so that they wouldn't fall within the purview of the statute. There's considerations of providing waivers of some of the provisions of the statutes, for example, 184 days or so many consecutive months, waivers for individuals who are conducting their business appropriately, own locally, and use the opportunity to enhance their lives without causing any significant harm to the neighborhood. So those are all issues that are still on the table. I'm going to ask the Director of Planning to give us a brief overview of what the proposed ordinance, as it comes from the Planning Board, suggests we do.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councilors. I don't know how brief I can do this, given some of the comments during the open comment period. We may need to do a little deeper dive here. But anyway, what I thought I'd do is I'd go through the points one by one and try to be as brief as I possibly can. There is several provisions here. The provision number 1 under the M section basically says that if you want to do short-term lodging, that you will get you will make an application and you will get a decision by the staff of the planning department with some criteria. We're going to have an administrative decision fee, and we're going to notify abutters. I will tell you that at the planning board level, the issue of notifying abutters was discussed at length, both pros and cons. The pro, of course, is that the neighbors will know what's going on next door and will have kind of a warning of what may be occurring next door. And at the time that we notify abutters, the plan is to also give them a procedural list of what they can do to comment on it and how they would file complaints if there are reason to file a complaint, so that they will know what they need to do. Using the Old North Main Street property as an example, we all know that there was reluctance on the part of the neighbors to call the police when there was noise problems. Police are the people in the city who enforce the noise ordinance. And so people need to understand that if it's rowdy next door and it's noisy next door, you got to call the police while it's occurring so that they have a record of it. And I will grant you that noise complaints are not the highest priority for the police department, but they will get to it when they can. If there's other things going on at the city at the same time, they're going to take
those items first and then get to the noise complaint, and the noise may be gone by the time they get there. But it will be on the record that someone called and complained about the noise, whether they determine when they get there or not. So that's the pro part about notifying the neighbors and the abutters. The con part was, as soon as an abutter gets a notification that this is going to be occurring next door, that they're going to complain and they're going to object, and whether they have a reason to or not. And sometimes it's existing neighborhood dynamics. You know, not everybody is super friendly with their neighbors, and we have a lot of situations in the city, as you all know, where we have the Hatfield and McCoys living next door to each other. And if one's doing something, then the other ones are not going to like it. So there's pros and cons either way. The recommendation is to notify abutters. Part B, the owner of a proposed short-term lodging shall provide the same agent information as required in RSA 540:1-B. Essentially, this RSA states that if you do not live in the community that you're renting, you have to have a local agent. I'm paraphrasing, and I'm bringing it down to as few words as possible, but that's essentially what this RSA states. So if you live in Massachusetts and you own up here in Laconia and you're trying to rent out, you've got to have a local agent. If you don't live in Laconia, you live in Manchester, you've got to have a local agent. I know a lot of the people that are up, say, in Southdown and those areas are using Bayside Rentals, and so they would be their agent. But not everybody's doing that, obviously. But that would be a requirement. So the instances where we had the absentee landlords doing the renting, that would be addressed under this provision. For the couple of people who spoke tonight that are either living in the house or are very nearby, then they wouldn't have to do that, because they don't have to do that. And then we're going to have a joint inspection from Fire Department and Building Code, limited to 7 items. It's actually 6 items. The goal of this is safety. I think we all agree that when someone comes to the city and rents a unit, whether it's in a motel or a hotel or a condo or someone's private home, that they expect to be safe, that they expect things to be in a good condition. So just briefly, smoke and CO detectors must be installed and functioning. All windows and doors that are designed to open will open. We're not looking at sizes. We're just looking to make sure that they open. No basement space can be used for sleeping area unless it has properly sized egress windows and/or doors conforming to the city's adopted codes. This would be the fire code, would be the governing code at this point in time for basement-type units. Functional fire extinguisher shall be visibly installed in the kitchen area. If someone has a kitchen fire, for them to try to find the fire extinguisher in the linen closet or under the sink or wherever someone has tucked it away is probably not the best thing. So the idea, and this is again part of the state, not the state, but the National Fire Code, which we've adopted, requires this in rental type situations. Square footage was asked about. It's essentially 200 square feet per person for rental situations. I have had discussions with the fire department, and we are kind of taking the attitude, maybe a little lenient, that if it's up to 400 square feet, we're going to allow 4 people, and then after that, we're going to institute for every 200 square feet over and above that would be an additional person. So a 1,400 square foot ranch would have 7 people. And again, this isn't a rental situation. I know that people say to me all the time, well, my family is bigger than that. We don't have 200 square feet per people. And that's a true statement. Myself, when I was a kid, it's a 1,000 square foot ranch. We had 9 people in the house. But that's your family. and this is New Hampshire, and we're live free or die. So whatever you do in your own house, however you overload it, that's you. But as soon as you're into a rental situation, it's a different situation. You're now covered by the fire code.
So you're not proposing to codify that standard then?
No, I mean, the
Just
state
up
has
to your
already adopted the
judgment
fire
then, or what?
code, and the city's adopted the fire codes. We don't need to go any further than that. Does that answer your question?
So if there's if I have a 2,000 square foot house, I could have 10 guests in that house?
Correct.
So, and just to be clear, I don't mean to take, but this is not a full-scale inspection. This is not like they're going to come in and like do it. This is
this is
what I would
list.
call a minimal inspection.
No, but I think the neighbors, sorry, probably should postpone this, but I think the neighbors would like to know that if it's a 2,000 square foot house, that they could have 10 adults staying in that house.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Under this.
Yes, yep. We had not considered the septic situation, although this limitation on number of people in a home to some degree does address that situation. Parking is limited to the number of cars that can be parked in the driveway, or if it's a condominium situation, how many spaces you have been assigned for your particular unit. And that's one of the things that we will ask about on the application form, and then we will confirm when we go out and do the inspection. So if someone's got a 40-foot driveway or a 35-foot driveway, you get 2 cars in that. If they got a 20-foot driveway, they can get 1 car in that. And that would be the conditions of approval, is that during a rental, you would have a space for 1 car. And we're really talking about the overnight parking. We're not talking about someone who rents a unit and maybe has a guest come up for a few hours in the afternoon and maybe they park on the street. We're talking about the overnight situation, which is the biggest problem. As you know, for 6.5 months out of the year, there's no parking on any of the streets overnight. So the idea that you're renting and you've got space in your driveway for 2 cars and they're going to have 3 or 4 cars, that just doesn't work. So that's the reason. Plus, that's one of the reasons for this requirement, is to get the cars off the street. But the other reason is because of the impact it has on the neighbors. They might need to use the street for parking for their guests or family that's visiting them as well. And if they're all taken up by the short-term rentals, that's going to be a problem. And then there's a redress provision for re-inspecting if needed. Go on to item number 2. The owner of a short-term rental is responsible for removal of trash in accordance with the city's ordinance. Again, can't put the trash out before the night before. So this try to take care of that situation where you get a weekend rental, they put the trash out Sunday night or Monday morning, and trash pickup isn't until Thursday or Friday. That's a real problem, especially when it's in the middle of the summer. So they've got to find a way of taking care of the trash, and that's one of the questions that we will ask during the approval process is, what are you going to do about trash? How are you going to handle that? And they've got to be able to do that. Ensuring that all the parking for the vehicles is on site, ensuring that the occupancy limits are not exceeded, and any other site-specific conditions that get imposed. These are the things that we would go over with the applicant, and then we would write those conditions down. We would let them know, you get 2 cars, you get a maximum of 6 people, you get whatever any other extenuating circumstances might be for that particular unit. There is we will obviously review and make a decision. There is an appeal process through the Zoning Board of Adjustment. That would go both ways. If we deny an application, that person could appeal to the ZBA. If we approve an application and one of the neighbors disagrees with that approval, then they could appeal to the ZBA. So it would be for either or situation. Approval would be for 1 year, and then you would renew the approval. approvals could be revoked for failure to comply with the ordinance or any of the conditions. So again, if we said your maximum is 2 cars, and we understand from neighbors and however we can confirm that there's consistently more than 2 cars out there, then that would be something that we would notify the property owner and could revoke their permit to do short-term rentals. It's the standard zoning, $275 for the penalties, and without using it, if you do it and you don't have approval, then you're basically in violation as well. Just want to say real briefly, the situation that Mr. Morissette brought up, we have talked about previously. I mean, we know that there are a number of places in the city where people have had camps that they have rented for 6 or 7 weeks out of the year during the summer or whenever. We know that's been going on for many, many years, and that they would fall under whatever regulations that we would approve. And it's an issue that we have to decide what we're going to do about and how we're going to handle it. It is fair to say that with the new platforms, that it has changed the dynamics of this industry. Mr. Morissette, and I don't want to pick on Mr. Morissette, but just using him as an example, you know, he's got his steady customers, he's got the same people that are renting year after year. There aren't any problems, and that's the kind of thing that's been kind of going on for a long, long time. This is not to say that someone in that similar situation is not going to have a problem renter, someone that, you know, sets off fireworks or has loud parties or whatever, that could still happen.
May I ask you a question on,
Sure.
on this front? Excluding the weirs,
Yes.
would you have any idea, or general question, anybody else, how many true camps there are located in the city of Laconia in residentially zoned areas? I can't imagine there are that many.
Not true camps, but.
I'm talking about not whether, you know,
Right,
real
right.
camp,
I don't know, Mr. Mayor, I don't know.
as opposed to a house.
Right, right. Or a former cottage colony that's been converted to.
Well, those would all be at the
condominiums
weirs.
Or whatever, yeah, and most of them, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So, one of the things is, as we've been going through this process now for over a year, is one of the things that we've, I think from a planning staff anyway, that we've come to realize is that we have concentrated on the bad things and the negative parts of the short-term rentals, but there's also a good side, that there's a positive side to this, and I'll give you a few examples. As this issue is unfolding over the course of the winter, a number of the homeowners associations, condo associations, all throughout the city, contacted the planning department and said, okay, what's going on and what do we need to tell our members, our owners? And so we told them what was going on, and many of those organizations took it upon themselves to tell their owners that this was happening. And in certain areas of the city, say near the weirs, you know, that are in the CR zone or the SFR zone, told them you need to get approval from the city to do this. And we had several, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but several applications in the spring from people along Weirs Boulevard and other sections of the Weirs area that did just that and got their approvals. And the good side to this, the positive of this, is that all these cottage colonies or motels that have been converted over to condos, when those people buy those units, they have best intentions of, it's great, we're gonna be up there every weekend, we're gonna have fun, and then the reality sets in and life sets in, and you realize that you're not in your unit every weekend or as often as you probably thought you were going to be, and so those units sit there empty for a good portion of the time. Now with these platforms, it becomes easy for people to do this, and they are renting them out when they're not there. And that's good for the city because that's a very big economic engine that we have been missing the past 10 or 15 years when we went through this conversion of weekly rentals to condominium type situation. So, you know, I think we need to take some time and think about the positives of this. We had one of the ladies tonight talk about, she's had a very high number of guests stay at her home, and she's referring them to, you know, the local restaurants, and that's good for their business, as opposed to them either trying to find their own or kind of defaulting to the national chains. Let's say they're going to the local businesses instead because they're being recommended by the owners to do that. So, you know, yes, there are some downsides to this. There are some issues that need to be worked out, but there's also some very positive aspects to the short-term rental situation. And with that, I've probably talked enough.
All right, do we have questions for Dean? One question I have, Dean, on page 2, item number 5, I guess it's not at number 5, failure to comply with the ordinance. This language assumes that you have a permit. Seems to assume that you have a permit.
Yes.
So what happens if you don't have a permit and you're just operating?
That would be number 6.
Okay. Okay, without administrative approval.
Right.
All right,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep. And that would be immediate.
What's
That
the-
would not be, you know, that would not be a first warning, second warning.
What's the
third.
fine for that?
It's the same, $275 for each
275.
occurrence. Yep.
Counselor Lippman.
I guess I'm just wondering the wisdom of this whole structure for trying to regulate this. You know, I don't know what our cost is for what you just described and what staffing it's going to take to do that when the fundamental issue of the case that involved this was lack of enforcement of existing ordinances that we have on the board, and whether we'd be better off. The shorter answer this is to strengthen one of the issues we've identified historically, which is sort of property upkeep, property control, if you will, in this instance. And just, you know, we're creating this large set of infrastructure to control something that really is maybe 99 out of 100 not an issue to begin with. That, you know, if it's been going on for years and years with its surface because of a bad actor, if you will. And, you know, is this the right approach to deal with the problem fundamentally is my question.
I understand what you're saying, Counselor, and when we had the old North Main Street incident, we were a little slow to respond. We did get some conflicting advice from our legal counsel. At first, it was like, this is a single-family home; they can kind of do what they want. And then, upon further reflection, they looked at a few other things and said, you know, this is the way to approach it. And that was the way that we started in the fall to approach it. I think we need to do something. Whether this is it or not is certainly the decision that you need to, you people need to make. But the legal interpretation that we've been under, in that these will fall under our rooming and boarding house ordinance, while I'm not disagreeing with that, it is very unclear to the average person, because they will sit there and tell you, well, I'm not running a rooming and boarding house.
I mean, you also gave the excuse me. You also gave the example earlier where if someone has a complaint, you know, for example, noise,
yeah,
we may be asking them to report it 5 or 6 times before, for example, the police can prioritize that issue it just seems like we're going all around it as opposed to hitting it head on. And I'm just wondering, you know, if we look at what the cost, the infrastructure and staffing that we need to implement this, is there a simpler way to deal with it more directly?
Personally, I don't think there's a much simpler way. As part of this proposal, we will be collecting an administrative fee, and by all accounts, we expect to have 200 or 300 applications. That's, you know, at whatever we set for a fee. I mean, the current administrative application fee is $125. Whether we stay with that same amount of money for these or whether we create a new fee for just this application is again the decision of the council. But even at the 125, if you're looking at 200 to 300 applications, that's a significant revenue, which addresses the issue of staffing. We are in the process of reconfiguring one of our jobs, one of our positions in code enforcement from a part-time position to a full-time position. One, to address some of the issues that have been ongoing with property maintenance in general, but the second issue is also to try to tackle this issue as well. Either way, there's 200, 250, 300 places out in the city right now that are doing this, legal or illegal or however you want to do it, but they're doing it. And we know of about 20 of them firsthand.
But how many applications you would end up having depends on how, in the end, we end up defining short-term rental.
Yes.
Okay.
That's true.
I mean,
yes.
the number could be cut down considerably depending on how we define and what areas of the city we would permit it in. Correct?
Correct. And I will tell you that.
I mean, if anything goes, you just need a permit, then 200 or 300.
Right.
Well, if I may.
Go ahead. Before we get into general discussion, let's finish with Dean. Is this a question for Dean?
Yeah, it's kind of a takeoff on what Councilor Lippman was asking. And I want to make clear that in terms of a simpler approach, I guess I've been beating my head against the wall for a while, looking for a simpler approach. I mean, the approach that we've adopted in the past is don't ask, don't tell. If somebody reports the problem, then we'll do something about it. And I don't think that that's a viable approach long term. I think we do ask, and we make the process as simple, straightforward, and easy as possible that we can while meeting basic safety and health concerns. I think that that's how we approach it. But in terms of the regulations that you're proposing or that the planning department proposed, I just want to reiterate, those are fairly simple things that aren't costly in the first instance to accomplish to either the applicant or to the city. Have I got that right?
Well, different people have a different view of what they think is cost-effective. I think many of us were initially, and maybe some still are, under the impression that people are charging a lot of money for their rentals every night, and in certain parts of the city, they certainly are. If they're on waterfront, they're getting a significant amount of money for each night of rental. But we have a number of short-term rentals going on in the city that are nowhere near water, and they're getting $50, $60, $70 a night type situation. And so when you say we're going to have a fee of $125 For some people, they think that's a lot of money. For other people who are getting $500 or $600 a night, they go, okay, you know, it's not a big deal. I will say about the simplicity of this proposed ordinance, you know, I have, other members of my staff have done considerable research on the line to see what other communities are doing. And in New Hampshire, we're pretty much it. And I have received several calls from other communities that are in the same boat that we are, that are resort communities, you know, and I don't need to name them, you know who they are. And they say, okay, what are you doing? What are you proposing? Can we see the draft of your ordinance? We're thinking about doing something. I don't think they've gotten as far as we have, but we've shared our proposal with probably 6 or 7 other communities so far. But as we go online and research this, compared to most places in the country that are trying to regulate, this is very benign compared to a New Orleans or a New York City, or where it's basically no, period, end of discussion. You don't want to do this. And they have the same reason and the same rationale behind it that for some degree that we have, is that you're trying to preserve the rental unit availability for the people who actually live in the city and work in the city and provide all those services that all those tourists are coming to take part of. But if you're a bartender or a server in a restaurant, you can't live in New Orleans because you can't afford to anymore, because the rentals have all been taken up by short-term rentals. Same thing's happening in New York City, San Francisco. I could go on and on and on. Miami, South Beach is, you know, the answer is no, period. And this is not a yes, but it's certainly not a no. And I don't know how to answer the question of, is there a better way to do this? We've been looking, and so far this is,
But doesn't this all come down to philosophy, though? I mean, that's what you were just alluding to.
Sure.
What's the philosophy of the community?
Right, right.
You know, do we want to encourage this, or do we not want to encourage it
Right.
for whatever reason? And some communities, as you said, a lot around the country just want to ban it outright because they don't think it's healthy for their community. Others, and we're, well, never mind, I'm not going to pontificate at this point. Any other questions for?
No more questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm here if you...
Don't leave.
I'm not leaving.
Okay, I'm going to bring this discussion back to the council, and I would like to start things off, and then I'll shut up and let the rest of you have your say at this. I'm going to say one thing and distribute one thing, if you will, and that is that, and this is more for our audience's sake than it is for the council's sake, because I know the council is well aware of this fact, that when the council considered this and the ordinance committee considered this, we sort of discussed and informally agreed, if you will, ahead of time, what our philosophy was, if you will, what we wanted to accomplish based on conversations we'd had. And so we were driven, in my opinion, by that philosophy. And that philosophy is very clearly outlined in the preamble to what's being posed before you tonight. And I want to read, it's brief, I'm going to read that aloud. The use, short-term rental, is regulated to preserve the traditional character of residential neighborhoods that can be negatively impacted by this type of use, and to help preserve the quality and quantity of the housing stock for year-round residential use. That's the preamble to this whole thing. And that's pretty much word for word what we agreed upon at the city council level, okay?
That's right.
So, from a practical standpoint, what happened was we sent it to the planning board and they massaged it and they had a subcommittee work on it and whatnot. And in the very end, at their last meeting where they approved this, they in effect gutted our legislation, or in effect gave it a negative review in saying that, no, we don't want to put a cap, if you will, on the number of days that you can do this a year or whatever. In other words, it was pretty much anything goes, but we're gonna regulate it. We're gonna make you have an inspection, we're gonna make you get a fee, notify the neighbors, we're gonna make you to give a permit. But in terms of regulating yes or no, where you can do this in the city and under what conditions, they took that out of what we proposed, okay? So what before us tonight is pretty much, other than getting a permit, is anything goes anywhere in the city. And to me, and we'll get into this later and let you all have your say on this, that it runs very much contrary to the preamble of what we sent to the planning board to begin with. So I'm gonna hand this out. I know Councilor Bounds and I have been talking about this, and he has a copy of this. If you could hand those down, and I'll go the other way. I'm just passing out some notes. They're not legalese of any kind or shape. They're just some notes to perhaps get the conversation started. If you could pass that down, thank you. Some simple ideas that are, and I think what happened at the planning board, I'll say this one final thing before I open the floor. I think what happened at the planning board is there are many different circumstances in the city of this person's doing that. This person's renting to visiting nurses 3 months at a time. This person is an elderly person who's renting out the second floor of her house to help make ends meet, that sort of thing. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of stories like that. And I think what tends to happen in these cases when we're trying to build legislation is that we all have empathy for those situations. And so somebody comes before the council and says, yeah, but I've got my mother-in-law or whatever the situation is. And so you start making exemptions based on a personal appeal from one person or a small group of people. Usually it's just one. And the next thing you've got is a toothless ordinance, and it's like, why did you bother in the first place, to go to your point? It's why did you bother to even do this in the first place? Because we've got so many exemptions and whatnot, it doesn't make any sense. So I think, in effect, what happened at the planning board, some people came forward and said, this would hurt me. And so they said, okay, we'll take it out. And the next thing you know, you've got pretty much a toothless ordinance because everything's taken out. So with that, I will shut up and open the floor to...
I'm going to just comment on that, on what you just said. I'm not disagreeing with how things happen at zoning boards and planning boards and even on the city council with respect to the input that that particular board gets from the public on any one particular issue. What I want to emphasize as far as where this city council is at, it was my goal to get that out of the planning board with a recommendation for whatever it was to the city council. Now that we've gone through that process, we are free to make whatever amendments we choose without and just move on it. So we decide this is a good ordinance, this is a place to start, these are good amendments, these are not good amendments, and we make a decision about that, then we're free to send that to a public hearing and take action after the public hearing. That's all I want to do is make clear is that the ball is back in the council's court and we can run with it or not. I say we run with it, but, I'm just one guy.
So what I'm trying to do here to get the conversation started is propose in bullet point form here a simple platform, if you will, that's not complicated, et cetera, that that would accomplish what we're trying to accomplish or said we were trying to accomplish in the preamble. If it turns out that the city council really doesn't believe in that preamble or wants to change it or whatever, then it's up to the council to do that. But that's what this is addressing, is the preamble, to
And I
say
think that
it's
preamble-
not good for the city, neighborhoods, et cetera, and housing stock for people to be buying. This is the central point of this, for people to be buying houses in Laconia for the express purpose of renting them out on a short-term basis. Councilor Lippman.
I would agree with that, except that if we're only talking about a housing stock of 200 to 300 citywide, whether that mix is really in the extreme, you know, if we have a housing stock of 15,000 units or whatever it is,
5,000.
5,000 units, whatever, I mean, we're not even, I don't think we're at that big a level. I'm just wondering whether an initial step might be is to do, for example, with that same intent, not wanting to have a housing stock mix that's out of balance, if you will, to the extent that you're talking about, is to, as a first step, is to register, to make sure we have a contact for a registered agent at each of the properties and assess as to whether this is really going on or not, and then to appropriately resource to deal with the few situations that have come to our awareness, where people are basically abusing their use of their property at the expense of the value of their neighbors' enjoyment and property values. I think that's certainly the residential component of this is, you know, people who've made an investment in a home and a part of the community. We're not trying to undermine that. On the other hand,
Well, I think
we
what's
can go-
scary, Counselor, is that I think we all, or I shouldn't say that, I think some of us, anyway, I believe from everything that I've heard, read, et cetera, there's an awful lot of literature out there, an awful lot of articles on this subject, because it's exploding, as Dean said, all over the country, is the fear that this is going to explode even further than it has.
So, but I guess in terms of a starting point, I mean, of trying to understand what the actual composition is and trying to get a handle on making sure we have appropriate registered agent and whatever for folks that are using it as an investment purpose. I think we could get into this in some less obtrusive way than what we have in front of us. And I recognize what you're saying we have in front of us isn't what we put out there to begin with.
Anyone else? Counselor Hamel.
I'm going to go the opposite of Henry on this. I think we need to do something. And the reason is what you stated is people buying up homes in Laconia strictly for Airbnb rentals or whatever rentals you want to, how you want to call it. I was at the planning board meeting the other night when they were discussing this. And what kind of made that a little clearer in my mind was there was a couple here that said they bought a house in Laconia and they live in Massachusetts, and that's their sole intention is for Airbnb or some offshoot of that. They have no intention of living here. It strictly is a business. I think the availability of units in Laconia is low as it is for our families to move in or whatever. I don't know about you, but once a week I get a mailing that says, do you want to sell your house, or do you have a friend that wants to sell their house? Real estate people are looking for homes to sell. If you have out-of-towners come here and buy in family residential areas for the sole intent of renting these out and have no care about living here, then, you know, I think we're headed down the wrong way. The other thing is, it's kind of like what David just said a minute ago. Right now, in residential areas, it's illegal, plain and simple. It's not allowed. So if we don't do something along this line, whether it's this or some amendment to it or whatever, then we get a complaint, we go to the house, and we say, you can't do that. it's illegal. You have to shut down. So 2 doors down the street, the guy's doing one too, and he's allowed to operate. So by telling this person he can't do it, but this guy can do it, you have no rules. So where does that let us? I mean, where do we end up with that? So we need to do something. You know, there could be discussion of, you know, we've talked about this today, that if you rent for 90 days or less, then you're an Airbnb, and I'll use that term. If you rent for longer than that, then maybe you don't even need to apply. If you rent for 90 days or longer, then why do you need to apply? If you rent for 90 days or shorter, then that's short-term rental.
But I guess,
And you gotta have some kind of rule on this, because if we're trying to make something legal that's not, then you gotta have something on paper that says what you can do and what you can't. I mean, like what the mayor said, there's a lot of communities that are just plain saying, no, you're not gonna do it, period. So, I mean, at least we're trying to come up with something that allows people to do it, and to try and help them to do this. But basically, right now, it's illegal, and they could all be shut down. So we gotta come up with some kind of terms. And, you know, if we vote on something, we send this back and we say we want this done or that done, and if we vote on it, it doesn't mean in 3 months or 6 months, we can't come back and say, you know, maybe that didn't work out, let's do this.
so if I could, the issue of more days than less, to me, encourages people to buy out homes and you treat it as a business. So I'm not sure that we've got the right calibration. I don't disagree that we need to do something and strengthen. That's why I've said at least start with registering what the situations are, making sure we have a control on it. And if we want to, I'm not sure if you wanted to discourage people from just coming in and buying homes as an investment to rent, whether having a higher threshold has the opposite effect of what we want to do. And I guess,
In what sense?
look, if I'm going to invest in a piece of property, I want more income, right? You buy a piece of property for income. You don't, for someone who's just trying to supplement their living situation, like the couple of people we heard tonight, it's not about making it just as a pure investment and not being part of the community. It's about supplementing the expenses of maintaining their home. I think that
Well, and
should be less.
this outline specifically exempts owner-occupied buildings.
Yeah, I mean, if a person lives on one floor and wants to rent the top floor,
Yeah.
that's fine, he's
or a
living
ro-
there.
Or a room, or whatever.
You know, but if they're gonna buy a home with that intent, then I think this council should say, you have to live there a certain part of the year if you wanna continue to operate that way. It should be some kind of thing that says, you just can't buy it as a sole rental property. You have to live there,
Short-term rental.
short-term
I
rental.
mean, if you want to buy a house and rent it to somebody a year at a time on a lease basis or whatever, then presumably the person moving into that house is living there as part of the community, maybe has children to put in our schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as opposed to somebody who's just there for a vacation. And next week, there's going to be somebody else, or maybe even tomorrow night, there's going to be somebody else. Now, you know, I mean, that's an important part of our economy. I think we all recognize that. But you know, I think and I started to say this when Dean was up there, I think one of the things that really complicates this from Laconia standpoint is Laconia is not easy to define what it is. And for someone to say Laconia is a resort community or a tourist community, I think is a significant understatement from a standpoint of what we are. Yes, we have a part of our community that's been at the center of tourism in the state of New Hampshire for decades and decades and decades, but we're also an old mill town. We're a county seat town. We're still the hub of industry in the Lakes region. We have by far the largest employer in the Lakes region in our city limits, et cetera. We're many things beyond just being a resort community. And I think there are those of us, I'm certainly going to count myself in that measure, that don't want to lose that sense of community we have. I don't want to be Lake George or wherever, where the only purpose every building in town is for rent, because our only reason for existing is to encourage tourism. Yes, that's an important part of our economy, but there are other parts of our economy that are equally important. And that sense of community is what I really fear we're in danger of losing.
You know, also, you know, we're always saying we want to bring families in, you know, manufacturers need people to work. They're dying for people to work around here.
Right.
And so now the homes are being bought up for Airbnbs. Where's the guy going to live? You know, where's he going to bring his family? Or the cost will be more than what they can afford. So there's got to be some kind of restraint or whatever you want to call it on this, so that if we've been trying for so long to get people to come here, they have to be able to have a place that they can buy or rent that's reasonable. And if these are all being bought up, then our city is not going to be able to accommodate that, and they're going to go elsewhere in the area, and we want them to be here.
You know, I know on my block, and we've talked about this before, I've lived in my house for 20 years here in Laconia. And when I first moved on to Dartmouth Street, the street was full of kids. They were playing wiffle ball and who knows what, bicycling up and down the street. The street was absolutely full of kids. Now there's one child on the entire block. And that's not good, and that's not healthy, and that's what one of the things we're trying to turn around. And if suddenly the houses on either side of me become Airbnbs, that's not going to help that at all. It makes it worse. And that's what I fear. Counselor Bounds.
Go ahead.
No, wait, you haven't said anything yet. Go ahead.
If I may, I will tend to, as I look at these notes, support the idea of 90 or less days, defines Airbnb. And I also like number 4, which talks about a minimum of 150 days residency per year in order to qualify for this.
5 months.
Exactly. And I hear what Henry's saying, but I also think there are folks who've suffered at the hands of some Airbnbs who are looking to us to find some mid-ground for them to be able to survive with an Airbnb in the neighborhood. And I think if we put some sort of restrictions on owner-occupied and number of days. Somebody mentioned renting to nurses. I know the hospital has a lot of these contract or whatever they call them, nurses, and they're here for 90 days or whatever.
That's what we're hearing, 3 months. That's where that.
Yeah,
that's
and they
the
usually
typical.
extend.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to be subject to this Airbnb regulation. But I do think it requires some residency on the part of the owner of the property.
To be exempt.
To be exempt.
So I apologize for the fact that those of you who are in our audience tonight don't have this in front of you. I can run through this really quickly. What the counselors have in front of them are bullet points, basically. A suggested outline of changes to what was proposed by the planning board. Number 1, short-term lodging is prohibited in all zones except commercial resort and shorefront residential, which is basically the weirs. So in the weirs, it's just permitted, period. Okay. 2, short-term lodging definition shall be amended to state that the ordinance applies to any rental of less than 90 consecutive days at a time. So that's how we would define it, 90 consecutive days or less. If it's more than 90 days, it isn't covered by the ordinance. 3rd, short-term lodging definition shall be amended to state that owner-occupied buildings are exempt from the ordinance. So even if the ordinance says you can't do it, if it's an owner-occupied building, you can. You'd have to get a permit, but as was outlined earlier, but you can do it. An owner-occupied building shall be defined as those where the owner lives on the premises for not less than a total of 150 days a year. Anytime, any days, whatever, a total of 5 months a year would be considered resident. So if you're in Florida 7 months a year, to oversimplify it, and you're in your house 5 months a year or whatever, then that would qualify as owner-occupied under this proposal. And those are the main points to what we have in front of us here. Councilor Bounds.
I don't, I think that some kind of regulation is necessary. I think that some of the proposals that we've got here might be arbitrary, and we might be able to refine it a little. And I don't think anybody's locked into 90 days or 150 days.
No, I'm certainly not.
I think there's lots of room for discussion. But I want to give a nod to Councilor Lippman and what he's saying. And what he's really saying is, we don't even know if we have a crisis or a problem. You tell me if I'm misrepresenting you. We don't even know if this situation is going to ripen into disaster for the city of Laconia, or we're going to change the fabric of life or the culture of the city of Laconia. I think that's all he's trying to say. And I mean, there's been one incident on Old North Main Street, but for most of the time, all of these folks who operate Airbnbs have done so responsibly, as far as we can tell, carried on their business without negatively impacting our community in any significant way. I'm just speaking out because I hear what Councilor Lippman is saying. So it's a consideration. I don't think I'd be in favor of it. I think I'd be more along the lines of finding some kind of a way to accommodate these folks, but to address the long-term concerns that have been expressed here at the table about people buying up Laconia and living in Massachusetts and all that. I think I'd be in more akin to that, but I think we ought to listen to, do we have a problem? Because if we do the carte blanche, and we'll get everybody registered, we'll know what's going on, and if there becomes a problem with that, we can amend the ordinance. Now,
But now you're into grandfathering.
you may be into grandfathering. That's true, but you're not going to be
Because right now, as Councilor Hamel has pointed out, you can't do it legally.
It's illegal, so there's no grandfather issue right now.
Right.
There's no grandfather issue right now. But I'm just trying to think this through, so I'm just expressing a view that, you know, do we have a problem, what do we do, and how do we fix it? So I'm trying to remain open-minded about this. Again, I think I'm leaning towards some kind of regulation, but.
Councilor Hosmer, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I share your concerns, Councilor Bounds. It seems like we're trying to write something that's comprehensive and looks out for so many contingencies of what might occur. It feels like we're writing an ordinance in anticipation of lots of problems. Yet the one problem that's been brought to our attention seems to have resolved itself, and we may have, as a city, have had a hand in resolving it. So there is remedial opportunity there for the city to straighten these situations out. My concern, having been at the planning board meeting a couple weeks ago as well, was that the number of people who are running Airbnbs responsibly, and we've heard from some of them tonight, we also heard from their neighbors who stepped up on their behalf and said, I'm really not aware of an Airbnb by any of the actions that they observe or sounds that they hear coming from the residents. They know it's an Airbnb because they're friendly with the owner. And I've also had conversations with people who say, you know, on their particular street, it's not the Airbnb that's creating the problem. It's perhaps a residence that has multi-units inside of it that are rentals that are creating some of the issues in the neighborhood, not the place that's the Airbnb. So, as much as I want to preserve the character of neighborhoods, and I think that's critically important, and also looking at the housing stock, I'm not sure this is ready for prime time right now. In my mind, I guess I have more questions than the answers that this is giving me.
So one thing I would like to point out is that I think we have a discussion on two levels here. I shouldn't say levels, 2 points. One is, as you just alluded to, you have a situation where it's happening, neighbors either know about it or don't know about it, they object to it or don't object to it, whatever. But it's a quality issue, if you will, in terms of the rental itself. That's a whole set of considerations. In other words, if we're going to do this, if we're going to allow it, regardless of whether it's in the whole city or one part of the city or whatever, to what extent should we regulate, how you can run the business, how good you have to be, how good of neighbor you have to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's where the planning board ended up focusing on, was the good neighbor, don't, be unobtrusive to your neighbors, that sort of thing, that aspect of it. Don't be noisy, don't create a traffic problem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect, the one that I'm critically considered, and not to be too repetitive here, is the whole philosophical aspect of it, about whether, that Councilor Hamel also brought up, as to whether or not it's good for the city, period, regardless of how quiet they are, whether it's a mouse renting it or not, whether it's philosophically good in a state that has a critical housing shortage and a city that has a critical housing shortage, to be devoting houses that could be providing, could be contributing significantly to our community life, instead becomes a motel.
True, but I would also look at the quality of the places being offered on Airbnb. Are these entry-level residences or not? I mean, that's a question that I might have.
Well, we need housing stock at all levels. I mean, certainly we need it in the $200,000 range, that sort of thing. We're critically short there, but the whole state has a housing shortage in every price range. I think Russ Tebow has said, I forget what the number was. Does anybody remember that? He did a study and said, right now in the state of New Hampshire, we're X under where we should be in housing. It was thousands and thousands and thousands of units that we have as a shortage, and it's not going to help to have people buying them up to create motels.
No, but could we also put a cap on the number of units as a percentage of the total housing in the city?
Could, but then it's first come, first serve.
For me, if I might, Mayor, for me, Counselor, those people who live in the house that accept the Airbnb folks are, like this gentleman and most of the others, quiet, unobtrusive, whatever. I think the majority of the problems are when it's a landlord who is somewhere else, Mass or Cleveland or wherever they might be. That you can't tell me they have any concern for the city of Laconia or the people in the neighborhood. I went down that street, they put the garbage out on Monday, and I think her neighborhood is picked up on Tuesday or Wednesday. They put it out on Sunday. But the raccoons and the dogs had seen to it that all of the neighbors got some of the garbage because no one locally was taking care of the problem. So when I start talking about a resident, someone being residential, I've got no problem with who rents out to Airbnb when it's
owner occupied, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And You know, I can think of Paugus Park Road, and there's a dumpster in the front yard of one of those nice waterfront pieces of property, and the neighbors will say the owner hasn't been there.
Yep.
People throw it in a dumpster, and I just think that's a condition that if I were in that neighborhood, and I'd find it unacceptable that there's a dumpster in the front yard, because that's their solution to trash.
When you buy someplace and it says residential neighborhood, you're not thinking of those kinds of problems. And if somebody's living there, you can massage these rules any way you want, and I'll probably buy in. But when you start talking about them not living there.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah,
Counselor?
I think the issue that I'm concerned about is that, you know, as we face this situation, I think the people on Old North Main Street, unfortunately, were the victims of this. I think we need some rules and regulations. I don't think we can back away from this. I think it's a reality that I think we need to face. I think Councilor Hosmer had some good ideas. Councilor Lippman had some great ideas, and I just think we need to think this through again, and I don't think that this is by any means ready for adoption.
All right, Counselor Hamel?
I agree. I don't think anybody's going to vote on this tonight, but probably what we could do is send this to the planning department and have Dean go over it and maybe come back with some massaging suggestions for what we can and can't do. Or, I mean, I think no matter what we do, we're not going to please everybody. So you just can't, and that ain't gonna happen. But
you know, the problem. It's not a problem, but we're sort of on the cutting edge of this, at least in the state of New Hampshire. And when you're on the cutting edge, you don't know how to predict how things are going to go. So I'm perfectly okay with sending this back to the planning department for massaging.
Well, it's not.
But they ought to wait a minute, they ought to have an idea of what it is the council is looking for in terms of.
You're saying planning department, not planning board.
I am saying planning department. Let me be clear on that. Did I say planning?
No, I just wanted to make sure you weren't suggesting, or if you were, it was clear you were suggesting that it go back to the planning board.
No, I've been clear. We got it out of the planning board and to the city council. We have the authority to act now and do what we want. So let's make a decision and do it, period. I'm right about that, right?
Well, as far as timeline is concerned, what I would suggest, and it's not up to me to make a motion in this regard, is that I haven't heard anybody tonight arguing in defense of adopting what we've been given by the planning board in the form that it's in now.
I think to the contrary.
Okay. So if that's a given, if that's a consensus around the table, and it sounds like it is to me, then the question is, what do we do next? And so what I'm suggesting is we send one or two ideas to the planning director, as Councilor Bounds has suggested, with him to come back to us at the next meeting with putting that philosophy, if you will, into words. And then we can go, then we'll have that solidly in front of us, and we can go from there.
Try to live with that.
Councilor.
Can I suggest what you had listed as these 6 items, that we come to agreement on a list that's either these 6 or some other 6 or some version of these 6, and then give it to the planning department, so we give them some concrete direction of what we want. I don't think you're far off on what you outlined here from my perspective, with some refinement.
Well, do you want to just go through them point by point and see if we have a consensus or not? It's not a final vote of any kind.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem if we do that, but I guess rather than sort of going back with another version of what we want, is to give them one.
Well, I'm happy to give them this. I'm just saying, I'm happy to give them this with the understanding that I think I've expressed, that 90 consecutive days seems arbitrary to me, 150 days seems arbitrary to me, and as long as we're all willing to send this on with the idea that we're not looking for, or they're not bound by 90 consecutive days or 150 days, but the general concept of what we're looking for is outlined in these four.
All right, does anyone object to that approach?
No.
Okay, all right, so is that a consensus then around the council? All right. So Dean, I'll give you a copy of this. Hand that down. If you could come back to us.
Let's be sure we get that up on.
If you could come back to us at the next.
He has one.
Oh, he has one, I'm sorry, okay.
You know,
If you could come back to
that
us at the
place
next
where everybody
meeting,
can look at stuff.
incorporating these principles into new language that's official and legalese.
Be happy to do that, as long as I can reach out to a couple of you and pick your brain over the next week or so.
Sure, absolutely.
Please.
Okay.
Some of us don't have all that much to pick, but we'll try. All right. So I'd ask the clerk then to keep this item under unfinished business for our next meeting, if you would. Last item of new business tonight is a request for an emergency purchase of a new inflatable towable rescue boat for the fire department. And I call your attention to page 33 of your packet. And Mr. Myers, who's going to make the presentation on
I
this?
will defer to Chief Biotti on this.
Okay, Chief, welcome.
Good evening, thank you. I'll try to keep this quick for you tonight. So I've asked to be on the agenda tonight to try to get funding to purchase a new inflatable rescue boat. It's currently the one that we have out of Central Station. I've been working on this for a couple of years on some different capital improvement requests, and I was planning on doing it again this year. Unfortunately, the boat has gotten to a position where it's I had to take it out of service, and so we no longer have a boat out of Central Station that we can bring to. This boat goes to about 90% of our water-related calls. It handles all of our smaller bodies of water. It handles the river, and then from late fall until spring, when we can get the bigger boats back into the water, it goes to every water rescue call we have in the city. The boat's currently about 24 years old. It was donated to us in the early 2000s. The trailer came from previous boats that we had, so it's been reused. We have repaired it many times with seals. It's a rubberized boat. We've sealed it many times. Those seals are starting to fail. So we brought it to a professional to say, what can we do? And they said, it's beyond repair at this point. So our patches, they worked for a long time. They're starting to fail now, and the boat is unusable. We did go out and get some ballpark idea for pricing. So I've asked for a range, knowing that, so we don't have to lock into an exact number. I'm looking for somewhere in the, I think I put on the request 18 to about 21,000. I know I can get it in with that price range. The prices we have were in the lower end of that, but it didn't factor in delivery and some other odds and ends that have to go with it, but those are minor pricing compared to the bigger part of it. So that's what I'm looking for. If I can answer any questions for you, I'd be glad to.
Councilor Hamel.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. The other night, the fire department was dispatched to do a rescue on Lake Opeechee for somebody that capsized, I guess, on a kayak or whatever. Anyway, the fire department ended up having to get dispatch Guilford out to bring their boat over to help assist with that. So, I think it's something that needs to be taken care of. We don't need to call another department. It's going to take a lot longer for them to get here for that situation. So I'm going to support this tonight. The only thing that I would like to see changed is the amount of money where it's coming from right now is the capital reserve fund. I'd like to see that.
Non-capital reserve.
Non-capital reserve, I'm sorry. I'd like to see that come out of Motorcycle Week Fund. There's over $100,000 in there right now. And this council and the councils, well, the councils of the past has always used that money if there was more than a certain amount in there to purchase. We've purchased vehicles, we've purchased hoses, we've purchased all kinds of stuff from this account where it's vendor fee funded. And also if there's monies left over from overtime or whatever, that gets put back in there. And then this council can vote on things that different departments need. It's not a tax-funded account. So, you know, I think that would be the appropriate place to take that. So.
Anyone want to weigh in on that?
I would support Counselor Hamill's suggestion. I would hope, Chief, that you get the best boat you can get, because when you put guys out on that lake, I don't want them in low bid.
So, one of my lieutenants is actually, he trains people on these type of boats. He's the one that I put in to find our best boat, and the pricing that I came in with for my ballpark figures that I had to do is the boat that is going to be the best fit for us long-term and for what the city needs.
Okay.
That's a completely outfitted boat for what you need, trail.
It's boat, motor, and trailer,
Trailer.
yes.
Okay, Counselor Hamel moves to approve the purchase of a new inflatable towable rescue boat for the fire department with the funds from the, what's the official title of that?
Motorcycle Week Special Revenue Account?
Motorcycle Week Special Revenue Account.
All right, you got that, Madam Clerk? And an amount ranging from $18,000 to $21,000 based on the awarded bid through the city purchasing process.
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Counselor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. We have 5 votes in the affirmative. The motion carries 5-0, and please note that Counselor Bounds was absent for that vote.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome. Counselor Lippman?
Procedural question. I think under our rules, that could fit under 28D. Emergency, the council may, without notice or hearing, adopt an emergency ordinance authorizing expenditures for a public emergency. And I think if there's any question as whether we had the authority tonight, that I think that would fit.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a question, so I agree with the comment that we need to do a public hearing if we're appropriating new funds. But these funds, in essence, have already been appropriated and declared, so whether it was the non-capital reserve or the motorcycle week, we're not appropriating new funds, we're just allocating them to an expense. So I'm very comfortable that, I understand the intent of the speaker earlier tonight, but I think we're on very solid ground here.
Okay. All right, we are on to unfinished business. Second reading and approval to update the city's ordinance on obstructing sidewalks and parking fines. Okay, we've got 3 motions to pass on each of these, or to consider, I should say, not being presumptive. First would be to move to waive the reading of ordinance number 201-13 in its entirety and to read tonight by title only. Counselor Hosmer enthusiastically makes that motion. Almost as enthusiastically, Counselor.
Perhaps more.
Perhaps more. Seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand.
Oh, yeah.
What motion are we on?
Just raise your hand.
6 votes in the affirmative. Motion carries unanimously.
As usual, I don't know what I'm voting for.
Sidewalk.
Might change now.
Okay. Next up is to adopt second reading of ordinance 201-13 relative to amending chapter 201 streets and sidewalks. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Counselor Cheney seconds it. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand.
Is this the one I voted against the other last time?
Oh, no.
No, this is not?
This is the imprisonment one.
Okay. Okay, I'm in favor of that.
Let's go to the replay. All right, did you vote yes?
I did.
All right, 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. And final reading to approve ordinance 201-13 relative to amending chapter 201 streets and sidewalks. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Counselor Cheney seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. All right, next up, we're on to fines. I move to waive a motion be in order to waive the reading of ordinance 221-47 in its entirety and to read tonight by title only. Counselor Haynes gets the honor of making that motion, seconded by Counselor Hosmer. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Second up, a second reading would be in order, pass on second reading ordinance 221-47 relative to amending chapter 221 vehicles and traffic. Who wants the honor of that? I know you all want. Nobody. Counselor Hamel. Counselor Hamel makes that motion, seconded by Counselor Haynes. Any discussion? All those approval of second reading, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. And finally, to approve, a motion be in order to approve ordinance 221-47 relative to amending chapter 221 vehicles and traffic as presented. Somebody please. Counselor Haynes, thank you. Second by Counselor Cheney. Any discussion?
I'm going to vote against this just based upon this rationale.
Because you're ornery?
So, yeah, there's no need to raise them to 25, so I'm.
Okay. This is the one you want to vote against.
That's the one I want to vote against.
All right. All those in favor, please raise a hand. All those opposed, please raise a hand. We have 4 votes yes, 2 votes no, and motion carries. And the ordinance is adopted. Thank you. All right. Last item of new business, it has to do with the proposal for a stop sign at the corner of Sheridan and School Streets, and this was tabled at our last meeting, so I need a motion to bring this off the table, please. Counselor Lippman makes that motion, seconded by Counselor Cheney. All those in favor of bringing this item off the table, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries unanimously. All right, so have we gotten any input from the public on this?
Nothing.
All right, so to refresh everyone's memory, the recommendation of the Public Works Department is to install 1 stop sign on School Street leading up the hill away from the lake, correct? Yes. All right. Motion be in order to approve the Public Works installing a stop sign on the dead-end leg of School Street at the intersection of Sheridan Street and School Street. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Counselor Bounds seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Council comments. Ward 1 Counselor is hiding. Counselor Hamel.
Yeah, real quick. And to go back with what you said about the Chaos and Kindness event, I was there for a good share of the afternoon and evening, and it did go extremely well. And again, I want to thank Scott and staff for getting this all together. I know Scott put a lot of time in trying to get things organized and done properly. It was a great event, and like you said, if this would have happened on the Avenue, it wouldn't have been a pretty sight. But we thank the O's people for allowing that to be there. Also, quite a few meetings ago, I brought up about the...
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
What did I say wrong?
I'm curious to know what your hair looked like while you were at the...
What my hair looked like? I
Yeah.
spiked it up.
It wasn't, yeah,
Yeah.
was it, what color was it?
Green.
Green, okay.
As breeze. But...
Had company.
Exactly. Also, several meetings ago, I brought up about the conditions of the rugs at the police station. I was going to make a motion tonight, but I'm not going to. I'd like for the councilors to go there when you have an opportunity. We got 3 weeks to go look at the conditions, and then at the next meeting, we can say, should we replace them or not? It's not in the budget for this year. It's $23,000 to do that, and the monies could be taken out the non-capital reserve fund. Did I say that right? Okay. To do that, so if you can, get over there and take a look, and if you
What
think...
am I looking at again?
The carpets.
Carpet.
Are you in this meeting?
Sometimes I am and sometimes I ain't.
It's an in and out situation.
David.
Sometimes we have to adjust the antennas.
Exactly. It's mostly in the hallways. They're pretty beat up. There are a few rooms that need to be done.
Okay.
But go take a look. That's great. Then we'll discuss it in 3 weeks.
Okay,
All right.
will do.
Anyone else, council comments?
So I know it's council comments, but I certainly want to acknowledge the work. Staff did the lion's share of the event. And additionally, we haven't brought it up tonight, but the Blues Festival for a first-year event was very successful. And I believe the schools had a great homecoming weekend, and the weather certainly cooperated in quite a number of events from the athletic side, as well as the homecoming parade on Friday afternoon. So a very successful weekend all the way around.
Laconia was a happening place.
Counselor Bounds.
I say it again. Chaos and kindness, the blues festivals, those are the kinds of things that we should be doing. It was a great weekend. It was a lot of people. Kudos to everybody who went through the process.
Anyone else? Council comments? All right, any other business to come before the council tonight? I will make one short announcement, councilors. If you will remain in your seats.
I got my seatbelt on.
And for our guests tonight, we have the need for a brief meeting that does not fall under the open meetings law tonight to discuss a legal matter, and so shouldn't take more than 10, 15 minutes at the most. And with that, I'm going to declare this meeting adjourned at 9:34 p.m.
Cheryl, can you leave that TV on and the microphones on, please? Yep.
Yeah, I'm big enough. You want me?
You can go out there, yeah, just.
What's that?
Me too. Just, I loaded on my